to first of all introduce Branko Terzic, someone I've known for many years as a FERC commissioner and now a senior executive with Deloitte. Branko?
Thank you very much. The theme of the interconnection between government, industry and government, to me, is obviously going to be regulation. Someone who's been both a state and federal regulator and CEO of a regulated company, that's the world I come from, and that's the world I know when it comes to government. And so as I've worked over the last 40 years around the globe, particularly in the former communist countries as they were privatizing, established private corporations, commercializing their energy sector, and I'm talking mostly about the utilities, electric and gas utilities, there are some sort of universal, I think, governmental lessons that were out there. Let me share some of those with you. And the first role of government, of course, is to establish the national energy policy objectives. And World Bank documents and other thoughtful people have said these generally have to do with objectives to seek efficiency, objectives to have supply reliability, objectives to sustain their environmental programs, an objective to provide some consensus level of social subsidy, but also an objective in many regards to remove energy subsidies, being different from social, if you will, subsidies. And typically the decisions that governments then must make, particularly if you had those transition governments where they were starting anew, was what should be the structure of the energy industry? Should it be monopoly? Should you have competition? And then secondly, who should own the assets? Do you want to maintain public ownership, or do you want to have private capital, or do you want to have, as we have in the United States, a mixed system where you have the Tennessee Valley Authority, Vanderbilt Power Authority, municipal electric systems coexisting, and parallel with a very well-established investor-owned electric industry, which actually founded the industry. I'm reminded that the first electric customer, not power customer, first electric customer was, of course, J.P. Morgan. And when Thomas Edison electrified his mansion, at the point, electricity was a luxury. It was not a necessity. At that time, gas mantle lights gave off a perfectly nice white light. They were very reliable, people were used to them, etc. It wasn't later until other uses of electricity, motive power, the motor, AC electricity with Westinghouse and Tesla came in, that we had this demand and the necessity for electricity. And so we have that, the same thing with the telephone. The telephone offered to Western Union. The president of Western Union said, why would I invest for $100,000? Why would I invest in that toy when I can get perfectly well-written messages off the telegraph? So the toy. My crusade lately has been that I think competent regulation is essential. Why do I say we need good regulatory practices in the energy field? Well, consider that there are 7 billion people in the world, and only 2 billion people have adequate and reliable electric service. Another 3.5 billion people have inadequate service. Their power is not 24/7 reliable. Recent figures out of the United Nations and others are quoting between 1.4 and 1.5 billion people have no electricity services whatsoever. 16% of urban citizens do not have electricity. 84% of rural citizens have no electricity. And so 50% of human beings, mostly in the tropics and others, still rely on wood and other things for fuel. Huge health and environmental problems with open burning that's going on, which could have been substituted with electricity and delivered natural gas. I attended, some of you did, the UNIDO Energy Forum in Vienna, Austria last month, and it was a wonderful, impassioned speech by Dr. Junkela, who is now leading the Energy for All organization, just stepped down as Secretary Director, about the importance of bringing reliable electricity to this 1.4 billion people as a matter of health, as a matter of fundamental human right. My assertion is these people today don't have electricity, not because they don't have incomes, not because they don't have natural resources, but because they don't have government regulatory systems that will bring in and build the systems they need. And my proof of that is the same people that don't have electricity at retail have cell phones. There are more cell phones in Africa than there are electric customers. Now, why is that? Who delivers you a cell phone? An entrepreneur. But in those countries, who is responsible for delivering you electricity in most regards? It's the governments, and governments have failed. So we have regulation out there, I assert, as a solution to that problem. According to the World Bank, regulation is to protect consumers from abuse by companies with large market power, okay? To protect investors from abuse by government, that's an interesting one, and to promote economic efficiency. I would also say regulation is there to promote service. If you have no service, I think good regulation will bring you the service. If the government does select the private option of having private capital brought in to provide these services, the duties of regulation are what? They're to control entry, to do the price fixing, to prescribe the quality and conditions of service, and to impose various obligations to serve applicants under reasonable conditions. This is out of Alfred Kahn's Economics of Regulation. You're all familiar with this. Very early on in the establishment of private utilities and private energy companies, what we call modern utilities, governments knew that you needed to have private capital, and they knew the only way you'll get private capital is a recognition of the role of profit. I'm quoting right now Fighting Bob La Follette, a progressive presidential candidate, United States Senator from Wisconsin, governor of Wisconsin, who established one of the first public service commissions in the United States, Wisconsin, in 1907. And he, of course, was the great consumer advocate at that time. The railroads were the pernicious monopolies. We're talking about 1907, where 80-some% of Americans still lived on a farm, where the railroad was the essential way of getting their goods, of supporting them economically. And of course, the pernicious monopoly railroad was then the target of regulation. Later, the other utilities came under it. But La Follette says this in his own memoirs. He says, "It is not because a corporation has a large capital or transacts a large and profitable business that is an injury to the community or a menace to prosperity. On the contrary, the development and growth of modern business have made large aggregations of capital absolutely necessary, and such capital is fairly entitled to a reasonable and legitimate profit." So if you want large electric systems, large water systems, large railroads, large other systems, and private capital to provide it, that capital has to have the opportunity for a fair return on their profit, either through a regulated mechanism or through a market mechanism where the market will do so. That early recognition was, of course, really key and fundamental, and I have decisions from early regulators of the late 1890s and early 1900s. From a 1914 order of the Wisconsin Railroad Commission, quote, "Public utilities must pay the market prices for what they need." In a 1918 order, "The cost of capital needed is a part of the cost of service that in the long run must be borne by the consumer if the service is to be furnished. This cost, like other costs, is fixed in the open market by economic forces over which individuals and a company have little or no control." Indeed, Claude Mandel, the International Energy Agency, said some years ago, "It will not be easy to attract investment most needed in grids, a regulated business. Investors," he said, "will need good confidence that regulators will provide adequate returns in the long run." And so we understand that setting up a regulatory system to provide this opportunity for profit, I think is critical. The ideas come out from 100 years ago. We've had 100 years of regulatory experience of regulating private capital, energy monopoly companies. It was something called the Wisconsin idea. It talks about scientific regulation, the notion that scientific experts, objectively and insulated from daily political pressure and whims, could objectively determine the costs of service, including the fair level of profit. And I would invite you to look at the literature there. The Wisconsin idea, for example, had this notion in it that the commission, the independent commission, quote, "is given the authority to determine in a scientific way whether certain issues are or are not reasonable. Scientific regulation. Theodore Roosevelt wrote the introduction to the book on Wisconsin Idea in 1912, and Theodore Roosevelt wrote, "It is no easy matter to give the public their proper control over corporations and big business, and yet prevent abuse of that control. Wisconsin has achieved a really remarkable success along each and every one of those lines of difficult endeavor," writing the Wisconsin Idea in 1912, Teddy Roosevelt, recognizing the need of regulation. I also recognize, having been born in one country that wasn't my parents' home country, growing up in another country as an immigrant, that there are national differences. Indeed, Charlie Phillips, in his book, The Regulation of Public Utilities, recognizes that utility regulation must be flexible enough to adapt to local conditions. He says that regulation is an economic, legislative, and legal concept. The legislature decides which industries should be regulated. Such decisions may be based upon the economic characteristics of certain industries, prevailing social philosophies, or political considerations. The policies adopted must conform to existing legal concepts and procedures, and compromise is thus the basic ingredient of economic policy. We also know what the characteristics of attractive regulation are. They are to display a transparent process, to be timely in the issuance of decisions, to provide a balance in treatment, to have a review mechanisms available, to lead to stable orders, and to be independent of pernicious political influences. Following that, we know from Bondbright and others how utility rates, regulated rates, should be set, what their functions are. The criteria are very practical attributes of simplicity, understandability, public acceptability, feasibility, freedom from controversies as to proper interpretation, effectiveness of yielding the total revenue requirements under the fair return standard, revenue and cash flow stability from year to year, and stability of rates themselves with minimal unexpected changes seriously adverse to existing customers. Of course, this is Bondbright's criteria. The decisions of government are what? Are to fix the structure, fix the rules, enable private capital to come in if private capital is sought. And from that, I think, flows the model that can be applied all around the world if once again, our desire is to bring modern technology, to have private investment, bring the benefits that we have in this country and in the developed countries to the underdeveloped world. Many decisions have to be made along there, decisions such as looking earlier, do you want the utility on the customer side of the meter? For many generations in this country, we were very specific. We don't want the utility on the customer side of the meter in a regulated way. They wanted to sell appliances and do promotion activity. They could do so through separated, affiliated companies with very strict rules. Going back to 1920 statutes, which, for example, in Wisconsin said, in designing electric rates, the regulators will ignore any revenues from the costs or sales of appliances, which was needed at that time. And so we understand these structures. We know what's out there. We know that the legislatures must take their actions in setting the agendas and writing the laws. We then have the implementation process on the regulatory side. All of this is well known. It has to be adopted and adapted in the various countries, different parliamentary systems. But I think the fundamental systems work. I would put my trust in regulation. Peter Manning says that trust is inversely related to bureaucratically organized rules and procedures. When trust becomes a visible issue and requires restoration or enhancing, it has already ceased to exist in an available form. The more an organization is trusted, the less information is required by the public concerning its day-to-day operations. Regulators can get this trust if they avoid some of the pitfalls of vagueness, over-inclusiveness, or over-complexity. All of you have looked and read and review rules put out by regulatory agencies. You're looking for transparency, you're looking for congruence, and you're looking for simplicity. in some, we know what good regulation is. I will assert that we need that good regulation to bring the benefits of 19th and 20th century technology to people living in the 21st century. Thank you.
I guess we'll wait until the very end of the panel, and then we'll have questions and discussion. So thank you, Bronco, for a very enthusiastic summary of the regulatory regime. Our next speaker is Ethan Shute. He's a Senior Vice President for Land and Energy with the Cook Inlet Regional, Inc. It's one of the Alaska Native corporations.
Thank you. Happy to be here with you in your conference. Welcome to Alaska. My colleague here just prefaced a statement by saying, if private capital is sought. And I think that's an interesting segue into the story I'm going to tell you here about our Fire Island Wind Project, and use that as a case study, as it were, to illustrate the interface between government and the energy sector here in Alaska, and specifically the electric utility market and space here in what we call the rail belt, which is the interconnected grid that runs from up Fairbanks area in the interior down here to Anchorage, and then ultimately down into the Kenai Peninsula. Covers some 80% of our population and load. I'm Senior Vice President, SERI. As mentioned in the introduction, we're the project proponent, owner, developer, operator of the Fire Island Wind Project, which is just offshore. Many of you may have seen it flying in here to Anchorage. It's prominent on the normal approach to the airport. It's a project that was constructed last summer in 2012, became commercially operational in late September, so we're coming up on just a year of commercial operation. However, the saga that goes behind this project is about a decade long, and that's a decade long with our participation, because it was actually a concept and an idea before that among several of our rail belt utilities. So the first interface between government and our project is the realization that here in the rail belt, and largely in Alaska, all electric power producers are utilities. There is no real commercial scale space for independent power producers, wholesale electric generators like you might see in the rest of the United States. So that gives you a couple of very unpleasant options when you propose a commercial scale electric facility, generating facility. You can attempt to become a utility, which is a torturous and time-consuming and somewhat risky proposition from a business case. Or you can do what we did, which is go to the state government and the legislature and get a carved-out exemption from direct regulation. Weighing the two unpleasant options, we chose the latter, and we sought special legislation for independent power producers under a strict set of conditions. Small scale, relatively small scale, only selling to economically regulated utility, and only producing power from a renewable resource. We sought that legislation, we got it, we got our exemption, and that was one of the first hurdles to successfully completing the project. In the background for this project, you've got to realize that we started polling the public here with a focus in South Central, but even on a statewide basis, 7 or 8 years ago, and would refresh it every couple of years. The project idea became fairly widely known, and it had the public support of 85% or more of those who were polled with these scientific polls conducted by polling outfits. So it had, you can't get 85% of people to agree on anything, essentially, when you broadly poll the public, but we had 85% or more of the people repeatedly knew what the project was, thought it was a good idea, supported the project, but yet we had we had multiple obstacles to realizing the project construction and ultimately operation. The second interface with government here is to realize that in this space, at least in the rail belt, all utilities are either directly government or they're de facto government. We have 6 utilities here in the rail belt. 2 of them are literal governments. One is here in the municipality of Anchorage. It does business as municipal light and power. It is a regulated utility. There is a very small municipal utility in Seward, which is a very small city. And then you have 4 cooperative electric utilities. They are vertically integrated. You have government-granted certificated areas of monopoly operation. Within those certificated areas of their monopolies, they're largely free to do whatever they need to do with oversight, basically solely in the space of rate cases. So in a backwards-looking, cost-driven regulatory model, there is regulation, but outside of that, they are largely free to do whatever their boards of directors, which are elected from their membership, decides to do. Within that space, I would argue that that's all government or de facto government, because you have created a geographical territory where your only option, if you want electric power, is to become a member of this cooperative utility that's vertically integrated, has a lot of power and authority over your electric meter, or to do it on your own and be disconnected from the grid altogether. The third interface with government here that we came to realize is there are no formal incentives, no regulatory requirements, no broad public support at a statewide level for renewable energy and independent power producers. Now, we do have a stated legislatively passed goal to get 50% of our electric power from renewable resources by 2025. And we have historically had for some years a renewal and refunding of a renewable energy grant fund, which at times when we had a lot of excess cash in the government because of high oil prices was sometimes funded, tens of millions, $100 million a year. So there is a grant pool, yes. There is a stated objective to get a lot of, half of our electric energy out of renewable resources, yes. There are no real market mechanisms to facilitate that change. The fourth interface with government, which is a little more subtle to realize, is that most, if not all, transmission infrastructure of any scale in Alaska is either built by the state of Alaska or is largely funded by the state of Alaska through direct appropriations for that purpose. The impact of this transmission space is significant. Obviously, when you have an interconnected grid, the transmission is your sort of what would commonly be viewed as your public infrastructure. It's the means to, it's an analog of the public highway system, interstate highway system. In this case, the state government has funded most of it. It is owned and operated in a variety of means, sometimes by coalitions of the local utilities, sometimes by coalitions of local utilities with the state as a participant. But the state has funded this, but has loose controls or sometimes no controls over the utilization and market availability of that transmission space for private enterprise. The fifth interface with government that we came to discover is that despite our direct exemption in statute from regulation as a utility, there is de facto regulation by virtue of the power purchase agreement being reviewed and approved by our Regulatory Commission of Alaska prior to it being enforceable and usable by our utility customer to be able to recover in their rate. While that might seem like with our regulation and with the fact that it was seemingly more than an arm's length transaction, it was almost impossible to arrive at a transaction with our utility. We faced significant and sustained opposition right up until the very bitter end. We had opposition filed in the case by several of the local utilities, the railroad utilities, that had really no stake in the game, because we had a deal with our customer. We were interconnecting directly with their system. There was no crossing somebody else's transmission line. We're interconnecting right into the heart of their system. It is a private transaction between the two of us. We are clearly arm's length parties, and yet we had direct and vociferous opposition. And the sixth interface with government to realize here in Alaska is there's a significant distortion in our energy markets here, at least in the electric energy space, by the direct participation of the state of Alaska, sometimes as a funder of projects, sometimes as a direct project proponent. And I think the most obvious example of that is the state's project that has renewed the effort to construct the Susitna-Watana Dam in the central interior here, about 120 miles north of here. It's a large-scale project. It would amount to roughly half of the electric produced in the rail belt if it gets built. And despite the fact that it's early in the reinvigorated stage of development, we kept hearing over and over, well, why would we need energy from your project? Why would we want energy from your project? We're going to have this very cheap subsidized energy coming out of this dam. And the market distortions that happen with that level of participation, where the project construct is basically the state provides half the capital to build the project, provides all the risk capital through the development of the project, and then provides a large subsidized, beyond market terms loan for the rest of the project capital. That obviously has significant impacts and distortions on the market. We felt it directly with our project. So with this history and all of our various interfaces with government, I probably forgot some. There were certainly in the permitting and other development phases, interfaces with other aspects of government, but those related directly to electric energy in this space, I have some observations. Here in Alaska, it's a very different environment within the utility space. It's somewhat of a schizophrenic view. You have really heavy participation by government in certain aspects of it, including as a project proponent. And in other places, the government is startlingly absent. It really just leaves the space to the big public utilities to do whatever they think is the right thing. Within that space, it is shocking. We had experiences with two of these big utilities in the rail belt that in other places you would never see, because they would put people under investigation by FERC. We had one utility, the municipal utility here in Anchorage, that threatened litigation against our project from